Power has been at the center of attention for centuries. From ancient empires to modern states, many philosophers have studied it, trying to understand it, and more importantly, how to remain powerful. Throughout history, long periods of domination came and went, but empires always faced one inevitable hurdle: staying on top for always. One philosopher, perhaps one of the most notorious in history, watched states crumble in rapid succession. What he witnessed pushed him to write a book that would later shake the foundations of political philosophy: The Prince. That philosopher was Niccolo Machiavelli. His work was so controversial that it was banned for years. He was even branded the enemy of the human race. Now, yes, there's a certain extremity in his teachings, but what impressed me the most wasn't just his tactics for power, it was his brutal, unflinching understanding of human nature. As many of my constant followers know, when it comes to philosophy, I like to take Bruce Lee's approach: absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own. So in this video, I'll be exploring Machiavelli through that very lens. I will discuss how human nature works, why the bad guys always seem to win, and what led Machiavelli to focus on the darker aspects of human life. So let's begin. To understand why Niccolo Machiavelli focused so intensely on the darker corners of human nature, we need to look at the life he lived and the world he lived in. Born in 1469 in the Republic of Florence, Machiavelli came of age in a time when Italy wasn't a unified country, but a battlefield of constantly shifting alliances. City-states like Florence, Milan, Venice, and Naples were not just competing politically. They were at war, often dragged into larger conflicts with powerful foreign invaders like France and Spain. These weren't distant wars either. This was a time of assassinations, betrayals, and mercenary armies that changed sides for the right price. Florence itself was no exception. The powerful Medici family had been exiled in 1494, and for a while, the city experimented with republican government. But this republic was short-lived and deeply unstable. In the middle of all this, Machiavelli, just 29 years old, was appointed to a key political office. He didn't have prior experience, but that hardly mattered in a world where survival mattered more than credentials. As second chancellor and secretary to the Liberty and Peace, he was suddenly thrust into the heart of Florence's foreign policy. His job wasn't just behind a desk. He was writing instructions to ambassadors, managing internal affairs, and often sent on missions across Italy and Europe. Unlike official ambassadors, Machiavelli was what they called a mandatario, a kind of unofficial envoy who handled the dirty work, often acting fast where a full diplomatic corps would be too slow or too expensive. These missions exposed him to the harsh truths of international politics. He saw the masks fall, saw the lies, the manipulation, the deals made in dark corners. He spent time with people like Cesare Borgia, a ruthless warlord who inspired parts of The Prince. Watching Borgia consolidate power through violence and cunning left a lasting impression. Machiavelli didn't just read about ambition and betrayal. He watched it unfold in real time. Then came the fall. In 1512, the Medici returned to Florence, ending the Republic. Machiavelli, now seen as a threat, was dismissed, imprisoned, and even tortured under suspicion of conspiracy. When he was finally released, he was exiled from public life, cast out by the very system he had served. It was during this isolation that he wrote The Prince. But this wasn't just a political manual. It was a raw, unfiltered response to everything he had seen. The book stripped away the idealism of classical political philosophy and replaced it with something colder, something real. It's no wonder many accused him of being immoral or dangerous. His honesty about power was brutal. But here's the key: Machiavelli wasn't evil. He just refused to look away from the truth. He saw that people, when faced with power, often choose ambition over virtue, fear over love, control over fairness. His philosophy was born not in theory, but in blood, betrayal, and the constant collapse of states. This is what led him to write about the darker side of human nature. Not because he wanted the world to be cruel, but because he knew it already was. And now, centuries later, his insights still resonate. Because while the players may have changed, the game remains the same. So let's discuss first a cynical view of human nature that Machiavelli exposed. It is human nature to think wisely and act in an absurd fashion. Machiavelli wasn't the first to write about power, but he was one of the first to strip it of its illusions. To him, people weren't noble by nature. They were unpredictable, self-serving, and easily swayed. He believed that beneath all the appearances of kindness and loyalty, humans are driven by one thing above all else: self-interest. He paints a picture of people not as saints, but as opportunists. Grateful only when it benefits them, loyal only when there's no risk involved, and quick to abandon you the moment trouble shows up. In his world, goodness is conditional and morality is optional. It was a sharp break from the ideals of his time. The dominant belief back then, especially under religious rule, was that kings and rulers were divinely chosen, that they should lead with justice, guided by spiritual virtue. But Machiavelli challenged this completely. He argued that ruling effectively often means setting aside what's considered good, because sticking to moral purity could get you killed, or worse, make you weak. His famous line, that a ruler must learn not to be good, wasn't just a catchy phrase. It was a reflection of what he saw again and again in real life: betrayal, deception, and political games played with zero regard for honor. For Machiavelli, these weren't occasional flaws. They were core parts of how people operate. Part of it came from watching leaders like Pope Alexander VI, a man who wore holiness like a mask while practicing ruthless politics underneath. The Pope prioritized family power over faith, used spiritual authority for personal gain, and manipulated enemies through lies and intimidation. When even the highest moral figure plays the game with dirty hands, Machiavelli took the hint. Morality and power don't mix well. His disillusionment wasn't just theoretical. He lived in a world where rulers were overthrown overnight, where loyalty lasted only as long as the gold did, and where mercenaries fought for whoever paid more. He saw how easily people's affections shifted, how quickly admiration turned to resentment. In his own words, people would offer you their blood and loyalty when things were easy, but vanish the moment things got hard. And so, Machiavelli crafted his philosophy not around how humans should behave, but around how they do. This cynical but clear-eyed view of humanity became the foundation of his political thought. In Machiavelli's world, power belongs to those who understand that people are fickle, that morality is flexible, and that survival often means making hard, cold choices. And this seems evil, but to gain permanent power, that is the only choice. A harsh truth that Machiavelli saw and was suggested to Lorenzo di Piero de' Medici. Some of the important ideas he offered, I will be discussing now. Men ought either to be well treated or crushed, because they can avenge themselves of lighter injuries, of more serious ones they cannot. Therefore, the injury that is to be done to a man ought to be such a kind that one does not stand in fear of revenge. Machiavelli understood power not just as something you hold, but something you protect. And for that, fear beats love every time. If you're a ruler, trying to be both feared and loved sounds ideal, sure. But the world he saw wasn't ideal. It was ruthless, full of betrayal and shifting loyalties. So he made a cold, calculated call. When forced to choose, it's far safer to be feared. Love, he argued, is soft. It's emotional, unpredictable, and easily broken when times get tough. People might adore you when things are good, but when danger comes knocking, that affection vanishes. Fear, on the other hand, sticks. It keeps people in line. Fear has weight. It doesn't depend on how someone feels about you. It depends on what they expect will happen if they cross you. To Machiavelli, human nature wasn't reliable enough to build a state on love. People, in his view, are fickle and self-interested. They'll lie, deceive, chase their own profit, and backstab if they think they can get away with it. If their loyalty is based on affection, it can disappear overnight. But if it's based on fear, specifically the fear of punishment, that's much harder to shake. He wasn't saying rulers should be cruel for cruelty's sake. He believed punishment should be swift, necessary, and purposeful. It wasn't about sadism, it was strategy. And when done right, it ensured order. He wrote, "There is no safe way to retain otherwise by conquering them." A key example he points to is Cesare Borgia. As mentioned earlier, he was that man who brought brutal order to the chaos of Romagna. Borgia wasn't loved, but he was respected and feared. He didn't hesitate to use force, and his rule, though harsh, brought stability. It's this kind of result that Machiavelli admired, not the kindness that wins hearts, but the decisiveness that secures power. From Machiavelli's point of view, harshness in leadership isn't a flaw, it's a necessity. The world is too unstable, too full of shifting alliances and fragile loyalties to rely on goodwill alone. When the stakes are survival of a ruler, of a state, then the ends, in his mind, justify the means. Fear, if used correctly, isn't chaos, it's control. And a key point that a fearful leader must have is what I will discuss now. Never attempt to win by force what can be won by deception. To maintain power and earn respect, Machiavelli believed a ruler had to play a delicate game, one that sometimes called for deception. He suggested that a prince should appear as a champion of talent and virtue. By celebrating skill and honoring those who excel in their professions, the ruler motivates people to work hard and contribute to the success of the state. But there's a catch. This encouragement isn't entirely selfless. It serves a purpose: to keep potential threats content and focused elsewhere. It's a strategic move. When people feel valued, they're less likely to rebel. So even if the praise is partially calculated, it builds loyalty, or at least the illusion of it. And in politics, perception often matters more than truth. But flattery is a dangerous game too, especially when it flows the other way. Machiavelli warns rulers not to fall for smooth talk or surround themselves with sycophants. Instead, they should carefully choose a handful of wise advisors, people who can speak honestly, but only when asked. The prince should press them hard, listen carefully, and then make his own decisions. Because at the end of the day, everyone acts out of self-interest. And without pressure, few people will choose virtue. So how does a ruler survive in a world like this? Machiavelli offers a metaphor. Be both the fox and the lion. The fox sees the traps. It's clever, flexible, and alert, able to avoid deception and spot danger before it strikes. This is the part of leadership that calls for manipulation, strategy, and insight. It's about reading the room, anticipating betrayal, and knowing when to lie. The lion, on the other hand, doesn't deal in subtlety. It uses raw strength, boldness, and presence to dominate. Where cunning fails, force prevails. A lion inspires fear, and fear, as we've seen, keeps people in line. To succeed, a leader must master both roles. Rely only on strength, and you'll fall into traps. Rely only on trickery, and you'll be devoured by stronger forces. But when you can outsmart your enemies and overpower them when needed, you become untouchable. Machiavelli understood that most people don't act based on principle. They act based on what benefits them in the moment. If a ruler can play into those desires while keeping a firm grip on power, they can control even the most chaotic of situations. But this game of deception requires balance. A prince must never get caught in his own schemes or underestimate those plotting around him. The real danger isn't just in being too soft, it's in being too clever for your own good. And that's exactly what virtuous people often lack. They're too guided by emotion and tend to make decisions through the lens of morality. While that may be admirable on a personal level, it's unfortunately not effective when it comes to preserving power, especially at the level of the state. Machiavelli didn't put much faith in the idea that goodness alone could guide a ruler to success. While he acknowledged that virtue might win admiration, he argued that politics demanded far more than integrity. The world in his eyes was unpredictable and often brutal, and in such a world, moral purity could be a liability rather than a strength. For a ruler to hold on to power, Machiavelli believed they had to be flexible. That meant being ready to abandon ethical ideals when the situation called for it. If staying in power required deception, cruelty, or betrayal, then so be it. Doing what was right in the eyes of tradition might feel noble, but it wouldn't protect you from enemies or preserve your rule. He saw the political landscape as a battleground where hesitation could be fatal. Those who cling too tightly to moral codes risk being swept away by those more ruthless and realistic. A principled leader, unwilling to get their hands dirty, could be easily outmaneuvered by a rival willing to cross the line. This idea echoes the later philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche, particularly his concept of the Übermensch, a figure who rises above traditional morality to create their own path. Like Nietzsche's ideal person, Machiavelli's ideal ruler doesn't answer to inherited moral laws, but forges a personal code shaped by necessity and ambition. For Machiavelli, a ruler's highest duty is to the state, not to religion, not to virtue, and not to abstract ideals. If a moral decision endangers the state, it must be cast aside, because at the end of the day, survival and stability matter more than personal virtue. In short, leaders who hope to rule effectively can't afford to be guided solely by goodness. In a world full of schemers and power-hungry rivals, sometimes the only way to win is to play dirty. Well, that was an important summary of what Machiavelli has to offer, and much of it is useful. But we must also acknowledge that his ideas have had darker consequences. The notion of creating your own meaning has, in many cases, led people to commit terrible acts. When morality is disregarded, individuals can be driven to extremes. Fyodor Dostoevsky illustrated this danger through his intense characters, most notably Raskolnikov, who aspired to be like Napoleon. In his pursuit of greatness, he justified murder and ultimately became a killer. Nietzsche, while often supportive of Machiavellian ideas, was also deeply aware of the potential damage. He understood how devastating the collapse of morality could be, especially the kind rooted in religion. When the falsehoods of morality fall away, when God dies, as Nietzsche put it, the aftermath is not liberation, but chaos. As he said, "What I relate is the history of the next 2 centuries. I describe what is coming, what can no longer come differently, the advent of nihilism."